And welcome into another episode of Tiger Territory, a Detroit Tigers podcast, part of the Foul Territory Network. I'm Kieran Steckley. With me, as always, is a man whose relationship with turkeys centers more on the bowling alley. He is Cody Stavenhagen.
Doing good. Last time I went bowling, no turkeys for me. It was a rough showing. Also, turkey. Are you a turkey guy, Kieran?
Nah, not really. I'm cool with it. I'm cool with it as like the traditional sense. You do it on Thanksgiving, like I'm smoking one, in here in a couple days. One time we did do brisket though, because when it's at your house, it's your rules. So I try to do something a little bit different every time though. So like it's not just the normal kind of bland thing, but yeah, I'm cool with it. I'm not against changing it though. Throwing a little wrinkle here or there. If I had my way, I'd have a small turkey and then like some sort of barbecue dish that I would prefer more than turkey. But the wife bought a 19 pounder, so that's going to be the main
Yeah,
course.
we're also rocking some turkey this year, and I will gladly eat it. But I don't know. One year I did Thanksgiving just me and my dad, and we had steak and crab legs, and it was pretty enjoyable. A good brisket. I think maybe one year did something like that too. So I'm starting to lean away from the turkey, but I don't really make these calls. So
I will say this, and my wife will back me up on this. Our best Thanksgiving was when we lived together and no family came over because we lived in Oklahoma and we had chicken wings. So like that was the most stress-free Thanksgiving I've ever experienced, including this one. But that's for the that's for my other podcast that I will talk about with family relations here because I'll have a lot of material for that. All right, moving on.
That's where the real money's at.
Moving on to Tigers baseball. We are talking here for the first time, Cody, since we had Dan Hasty, the wonderful Dan Hasty, on the podcast. And if you haven't listened to that, if you haven't gone and watched it on YouTube, you should. It's enjoyable. It's a lot of fun. Dan, as nice as it gets in this business, very gracious with his time. And he gave some good insight. So I think it'd be a good idea, Cody, for us to kind of plug some of our bigger takeaways from that. And the number one thing that I took from talking to Dan, and look, you got to remember, like, he is of the organization, right? So he's not going to go like talk bad about people, you know what I mean? And nor that's just good practice in general, but he's not going to come on here and dig anybody. But he did talk about comparisons, and I thought in a very fair way. And a specific one that I took away is a guy that I just don't know that much about, and he was the minor league pitcher of the year this year, Jaden Ham, and he said, like, look, there's an argument to be made that maybe this guy, with the success that he had in West Michigan, should have perhaps, been called up to Erie, and he wasn't. He spent the entire year in high A ball, and if you look at his numbers, they're quite impressive. And then if you look at, like, he was drafted, I guess, like 2 seasons ago, last year, however you define that. And so it would have been a lot of change in his life had he gone up to Erie. And I thought there's an example of this administration being very deliberate, because if he's already putting up good numbers, that means you can probably work on some things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to work on if you go up to the next level. And that's just my very amateurish take on, player development at that level, but that kind of makes sense to me. So when you go back, and there's clips on our X account, Tiger Territory _ Cody Cody Stavenhagen, I'm Kieran _ Steckley. Like, you can go back and watch some of these things. But your takeaway, Cody, from our talk with Dan?
Yeah, I think I asked him about player development. Why is it different? Why is it better? People only talk about this stuff in very vague terms. I never know how to answer that when people ask me that question. I thought Dan gave one of the better answers I have ever heard. I guess it's not necessarily unique to say, well, there's more of an individualized plan, but comparing it to the regime of old, the Tiger way of old, and saying that there's not really like a blanket plan for player improvement. It's creating a very detailed look at every single player, whether you were a first-round pick or a 20th round pick, and devising a plan to get the most out of you, and then really investing in the little things, saying, like, I've never heard so many players care about nutrition. Like, I don't know if that will ultimately impact their careers, but that's interesting to hear. As Daniel said, you would almost, it would seem superfluous when you would see like the Dodgers and the Rays doing that, and you kind of roll your eyes. But then you think, well, if this is what the good organizations are doing, we have to be doing that as well. And now it's a different world. The Tigers are doing those things. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend going back and watching the Dan interview just for a lot of cool little insights like that. His insights when Max Clark's overarching goal wanting to be starting a foundation was phenomenal. Just like some cool tidbits on players that I hadn't really heard before that you would only get from someone who's around these prospects every day like Dan is.
Yeah, and I thought, him saying it's something that I like assumed, but he gets firsthand knowledge about. It's like, love it or hate it when you talk about things like payroll and like whether an owner is quote unquote cheap. That's not really the discussion I'm trying to have right here. However, that's the thing you want to hear as a fan, is that there is resources being put into the overall organization, the health of the organization. And that's really what Scott Harris talks about when he talks about, Chris Ilitch, has me, whatever I want to do, like he backs me, I support him, all that stuff. And there's Dan saying the same thing. And he is somebody who is in a unique position that he gets to see it. Like he gets to experience it, maybe even talk to these guys about it. And so I think that should be reassuring for Tigers fans everywhere, even if you still don't want to be in the 20s in payroll, which is obviously understandable. And that discussion we might get to here a little bit later in the podcast. These guys aren't going to be payroll factors for a while, but we also talked with Dan about Tyron Lorenzo and Josue Briseño, two guys that killed the Arizona Fall League. Briseño MVP, both All-Stars. Dan had some nice insights on those guys as well, so to go check that out. But you, Cody, you just wrote about this week about these guys, and I'm trying to kind of put into like perspective kind of where they're at in my mind / like Tigers fans' minds, because they're reaching hype levels that I would probably say exceed like even Max Clark and McGonigal in a way, because they're a little newer, especially Lorenzo. Briseño, we didn't really see that much. And so to see these guys get like actual accolades, with respect to McGonigal, I know he did too, but to see these guys get actual accolades and the reactions to them is making me think they might be like the most hyped prospects in the system. So I'm curious. They're both young guys. They're both, different levels of new to these levels of professional baseball. And they're both catchers, and they're both guys we're not sure if they're going to play catcher. So I'm kind of curious in your reporting of this story, did you, and you hadn't talked to them at all yet either. So I'm kind of curious, like, what kind of gauge did you get from these guys who, like, I guarantee you we're going to be hearing from them about them, probably talking about them like all next year as well.
Yeah, and I talked to Briseño once before, and talking to him again on just a Zoom call. Like, I'm really impressed with this guy. Like, he seems to have a great personality, and this is going to get me on a soapbox a little bit, but like, the international signing system is messed up. MLB needs an international draft. Okay, I'm bringing this up because I've talked to plenty of international prospects before, and you ask them about like when they signed or like when they knew the Tigers were interested, and often you hear like, yeah, I had no idea. Like, my trainer, my whatever came and told me like, hey, you signed with the Tigers. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And Briseño was kind of asked about this and like really broke it down. He started talking about 2019, and he's like, no, I want to clarify, that was like an agreement. It wasn't a signing. And, kind of went through the process, had an idea of some other teams, including the Padres, that supposedly were interested in him. And then like officially signing on the dotted line in 2022. I don't know. That because it's a messed up system. I'm not saying these kids should know what's going on. They're like freaking 16 and all that. But like, Briseño seemed very aware of the process, which just told me like, okay, this is an in tune, intelligent guy, and he seems well spoken. I mean, he's talking through an interpreter, but he's getting like thoughtful answers. So really impressed with his personality. Lorenzo, I admittedly was not actually on that call. I was on an airplane at the time, so I went back and checked some video of it. Seems a little more quiet, maybe a little bit more serious. But obviously he's a serious force to be reckoned with at the plate right now. So not as many takeaways on him. Still have never met him at all in person, but yeah, like it's kind of cool just having two big dudes who can mash in the system. Don't know what the future is going to hold. Defense is a huge component for both of them, whether they stick at catcher or not. I thought it was interesting. The Tigers have not yet officially had a conversation with Brasinho, according to him, about moving away from catcher, despite the fact he only played first in DH in the fall league. Maybe that's typical Tigers these days, keeping every possible option and avenue open. But yeah, those are some of my thoughts.
I mean, we're not going to go through scouting reports here or whatever, but both of them went on record as saying they want to stick a catcher, which I guess is like the right thing to say.
Have you ever heard a player be like, "No, I really want to move from my original position"?
I would. I'd be like, yeah, give me the first base, man. What am I gonna try to damage my body playing catcher and slower roll my development? When this bat's getting me there. All right, cool. I'll play first base. Hell, I'll play third. I don't care. Just get me out of catcher. Catcher is the only position where I'd be like, yeah, it's cool. Maybe pitchers probably be like, all right, yeah, I realize I'm not really a starter. So if we can get this relief thing going here a little bit, that might,
the smart ones, but most of them are real stubborn about wanting to stay starters.
So I thought that was interesting. And it's also it's going to be fun because longtime listeners know that we are very pro bromance on this podcast. And we've got
a new one. We got another one.
We've got another one that maybe we'll have to have Dan come on sometime next season, midsummer or something like that, and give us just the bromance breakdown. You know what I mean? Because those guys, and there might have to be a nickname said for them at some point. I mean, that's the kind of hype that we're dealing with here. You know what I mean? So yeah, really cool to see them I don't know. It was relatively open for, guys so young and at that level. And, Lorenzo spoke about the adjustments, being traded. That's another thing too. You go through this international signing stuff and then you get in a system and then just like that, you're traded. And also I have immense respect for these young kids. You're going to a different country. There's a language barrier stuff. I know these organizations take care of them, but you're just living in a completely different world. You know what I mean? So, immense respect for being able to handle all that, because go back to when you were 19, 20 years old and then excel on the baseball field to at this point they have. So yeah, it's a really cool story and one that I can't wait to follow, and something that makes Scott Harris look smarter and smarter every time we get an update on the Ronzo. So all right, we didn't touch on this last time because we had the Hasty interview, but the Tigers did make some tangible moves, with the roster. The probably the most notable. Let's start with the DFA of Wilmer Flores, Cody, because that's a guy that if we were to go back, he was a futures game guy. He was where could he be? In the system, when are we going to see him? And then he quickly became, for lack of a better term, an afterthought. And it just seems like yesterday we were hyping this guy up and now he's DFA'd. Not all prospect stories are success stories. So I'm curious, what's your kind of read on what went down here? Why? Because in theory, there's a lot to work with, and if you give this organization a lot to work with, or as Hasty called it, their superpower, seriously, that it seems like a guy that you wouldn't necessarily quote unquote give up on or move on from, but they felt differently.
Yeah, I was pretty stunned. Regardless of the numbers, look, Wilmer Flores did not throw a lot last season. 31 innings. He had a 7.84 ERA in AAA. His ERA was 8.53. it was pretty ugly. But still stunned that the Tigers would move on from a 23-year-old going on 24 who throws 100. I mean, this guy, again, 2 summers ago, futures game, top 100 prospect. This past spring comes out throwing a hundo. Now he's gone. Like, that seems almost on Tigers like. So the context here, some injuries, some underperformance, and I think there was a little more to it. I think I heard rumblings that Flores basically wasn't taking to some of the adjustments the Tigers wanted him to make, or had made previous adjustments through his own people that were not actually good for him, led to some of the struggles. Hey, let's fix that. It didn't go well. So it seemed like maybe it became a, like, I don't want to be out of turn, but like there was kind of some personal factors at play here. Nonetheless, I'm surprised that they would just cast him off. Like, in looking at the guys who could get non-tendered, he was not even on my radar. Talented young pitcher, like, seems like some clay you would want to keep molding. So that must tell you, like, whatever disagreements there were, maybe we're pretty serious in nature, where the Tigers felt it was best to just wash their hands and move on.
Yeah, I mean, you almost, like, even if there's no, like, reporting on something like that, that's like the only logical conclusion that you could almost make, is that, like, it's just there is no mesh point here, apparently. Like, that, that just seems like a logical guess, because like you said, all the talent, and you typically don't give up on guys that, like the question we always ask, like, how would you feel if he went to the Rays? You know what I mean?
Right. He missed most of, like, the summer with an AC joint sprain in his shoulder. So it does make you wonder, like, how serious could that injury be? Is there more to it? That's one of those things we won't have the answers to.
And by the way, maybe there comes a day that people who do podcasts on the Foul Territory Network talking about other franchises say, if the Tigers let this guy go, like, what's the deal? You know what I mean? Like,
I think we're not that far away from being there. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, to kind of recap a little bit, they agreed to terms with McKinstry and Ibanez. That's 1.6 and 1.4 million, respectfully. And then other ARB eligible players: Skubal, Rogers, Foley, Mize, Vierling, Vest, Brisky, Lang, and Baddoo were tendered contracts. So I almost want to start with McKinstry a little bit, since it's signed, sealed, and delivered here, Cody. The Ibanez thing makes sense, because we see exactly what he's used for, and we see clarity on when he's overused. And I think we experienced this past year, like, going away from just he's very good against lefties, but he's not. We're probably not going to get that many Barry Bonds gifts anymore. You know what I mean? There was a cooling off period there for him to the year, and he did have that spectacular double in the wild card round. So respect there, of course. But he's a valuable piece. But I don't think the hype level has probably gone back down to where it should be about what his role is on this team. McKinstry's an interesting one to me, because he was, when I look at team ascension, going from this state to this state to this state, one of the things I look at is you're going to outgrow, and there's another one we'll talk about here in a little bit. You're going to outgrow certain guys, there's, for Lions fans out there, like Jason Kabinda is a guy that it's like, look, you love having him around, but, like, eventually the talent level has to ascend overall, and you can't just keep carrying guys that you like, that check all these other boxes, McKinstry felt like, to me, a player that you could graduate from, if that makes sense. And I understand he's your number one pitcher out of the pen when the game is, or maybe not even out of the pen, but when the game is 10 runs or more. I understand the handedness. I understand the utility that he plays 8 positions. I get all that. But I was mentally prepared for the next Zach McKinstry, not necessarily the return of Zach McKinstry. Now, obviously, I'm wrong as of now, so like I'm not saying I'm correct on that, but he was a guy that I just felt like you don't have to bring back. You know what I mean? Am I making any sense here?
Yeah, I was not surprised that he's coming back and that Ibanez is coming back. Both of them are parts that could, in theory, be upgraded. McKinstry probably more so than Ibanez, but I always thought the Tigers would take these guys to spring training because they've been part of the team, because they have kind of their own chess piece value. We know the Tigers like them. I'd be curious to know the language that's in these deals, especially the one with McKinstry. If he's were to be cut or moved on from by a certain date, it may not be fully guaranteed, even though it's an agreement that's been reached beforehand. So that could be a possibility. You bring these guys to camp because you like them. And if you've upgraded your roster, if you've signed some real dudes and everyone's healthy, you say, okay, all right, we're going to move on. But I think there's no harm in bringing them this far. Now, like McKinstry, like we've talked about it. I really like Zach, so I don't want to like poo-poo on him as a player. But there's kind of this narrative that he was like, really good in August and September. And he did. Like, he was low-key a gritty piece of the gritty Tigers, and he made some big plays, came through some big hits, but he hit like one home run in the final 2 months. The OPS was 750s, which is like good, not great. So like even that elevated version of McKinstry wasn't actually bringing a ton to the table. Yeah, but he hits left-handed and he plays a million different positions, and so the Tigers are gonna keep him around.
Yeah, and like I guess the other end of this equation is that you want to be in a organizational state that, and look, we're talking about a guy's 1 year to 1.6, so it's not like we're not. And obviously, money doesn't actually matter with these teams. They just pretend that it does. But like there's an element of you should really be in a state that you're constantly like upgrading the Zach McKinstry position, and honestly, to a certain extent, the Andy Ibanez position with younger guys. McKinstry is 29. He'll basically be age 30 whole next year. He's an April birthday. So
wait. Are you saying the Tigers should earmark at bats for young players? Is what we're getting at?
Earmark bats, young players. I've heard that before.
So are you saying you could like bring in a real veteran bat, maybe get rid of one of these fringe roster guys and give young players some of those at bats? That's a pretty novel concept, man. I wonder if they thought of that.
Carry the two. Yeah, that checks out.
It's an idea.
So yeah, I mean, good on him. It's not like I don't like having him on the team, but again, like if you're gonna do this earmark thing, you're looking and you're gonna be limited, quote unquote, in payroll. Like you all of a sudden the spots to upgrade get smaller. You know what I mean? That's really all I'm saying. And this potentially could still be, but potentially could be one of them. Another guy that was tendered a contract that is been a part of the Tigers as long as we've been doing this podcast. In fact, he has been a topic probably starting like episode 4 that we started having to talk about this guy. And to his credit, he's kept it interesting, I should say. Akil Baddoo. We always would joke is like, people be like, should I get a Baddoo jersey? Should I not get? We always said yes, because it's a moment in time that you'll always remember. And you go back to 2021, man, there were some fun times, and he's had other moments, but you like that spark that he had initially. Spark is not a word that you can really describe Akil right now. He was never really in rotation with the Tigers, like at all. And if you look at his numbers, he batted 137 in 73 at bats for the major league team in 2024. It's not a lot of at bats. All right. And like, all right, well, maybe he was killing it in Toledo. He just didn't really get a chance to play every day in the major leagues. Well, he was 238 in Toledo. He played in 323 at bats with 100 Ks and 48 walks. So rhythm was not had there. And everyone and their mother and their uncle and everyone at the Thanksgiving table thought like this just made logical sense to non-tender Akil Baddoo, but that did not happen. So that leads me to believe they see something that we don't. Is there some value that they're going to tap into, like AKA this role thing that has become part of this team? Or is it just hanging on for now and we don't want to lose the asset until we deem it like 100% the better move to go in this direction?
Yeah, this one was a huge surprise. I definitely thought last Friday would be Akil Baddoo's last day as a member of the Detroit Tigers. I mean, Kieran, go back 3 years after his magical Rule 5 season. Since then, he has hit 203 with a 328 slugging percentage. I mean, that is zero slug. 619 OPS over 664 plate appearances. He just hasn't produced, and Keel, another guy I really like, but it's clearly worn on him. Think back to the rookie year, the big smile, the helmet flying off as he rounds the bases, kind of this like energetic personality. We haven't seen that with Akil, man. When I've been around him, he's kind of siloed himself off a little bit. You don't see him interacting with the teammates near as much. He's not near as approachable, like from a media standpoint. He's just seemed like A, quiet, and B, frustrated. And I guess hard to blame him when you're going through struggles like he has. But that all leads up to, like, I keep asking myself, why did they tender him? If they thought there was if they liked any component of his game, which clearly he does have tools that he brings to the table, but I think he would have been on the playoff roster. Like, Jace Young did not play in the playoffs. Like, he could have been there as a standby to run or something. Like, that roster spot didn't really have a lot of value. So I don't really think like that's it, which I think maybe this is classic new era Tigers of just like, they're going to keep every option open. I would still think Akil's got to be the first or second guy coming off this roster next when they sign someone. But until then, like, I guess don't move on from him unless you have to, maybe is the thinking here. Like, wait until the last possible minute. We hear Scott Harris and Jeff Greenberg talk about that being like a big part of their decision-making process, like using every single amount of time allotted. So that would be my guess here for why Akil was tendered a contract, but I would be beyond stunned if he showed up for the first day of spring training in Lakeland with the Tigers. All that said, maybe another reason they kept him, you do have to envision Baddoo as one of those guys that you let go and someone's picking up right away because he's fast. He has a unique skill set. There's clearly something in that bat, like just the shredded body type. Like, is there a little more power in there? As ugly as he looks defensively, he's actually graded out like pretty good metrically. So like another team would scoop him in a heartbeat. Maybe that factors in here as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a guy that's game is easy to fall in love with from a fan's perspective, and honestly from a storyteller's perspective. There's a lot of elements there that you have incorporated in your writing, and like at the same time, was how confident was anybody really when he came up to the plate? Like, it just felt like the juice wasn't there. Maybe there's a way to recapture it. I like what you said there about, taking the time. Maybe these are the guys that we're starting to form. Like you talk about this offseason all the time, trying to think like the Tigers brass, and some of these moves might kind of help shape us mentally, trying to think like them. You know what I mean? And then
a lot of teams. All right, here's my intent. A lot of teams have 40-man space, especially after the non-tender deadline. A lot of teams are out there. So if another team wants to grab Akil, this would be they would have done it yesterday. If you wait until February, you sign someone, you let go of Akil, maybe he floats out there. Maybe you can get him back in your organization if you like his skill set, or just like don't want him playing for the Guardians next year. Something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, maybe the nightmare scenario is one Willie Castro. Let this guy go and he becomes an all-star and a Gold Glove finalist, and like the face and mental tone setter of your franchise. Like, it happened for a good team, and he made the playoffs 2 years ago. Things happen. This is baseball. So a lot to chew on there. A lot to chew on as you guys are chewing on your Thanksgiving meal. So I want to thank Dan again for taking the time to meet with us. I want to thank Cody for taking the time to do this podcast with me, because I have a blast. And I want to thank every one of you for dedicating time, a click, a nice comment, all that stuff. It makes us feel great. It means a lot to us. I know I speak for Cody on that. And so I have to do the plug again. Please go to YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube, hit the notification bell. Helps us out as we grow this going into the next season, which figures to be one of the more interesting ones the Tigers have had. And Apple and Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe, 5-star review if you feel so inclined, because we want to keep doing this, and we want to keep doing it bigger and better. And by the way, we still got a lot more in the works. Still got a lot more in the works. So from Cody Stavenhagen, I'm Kieran Steckley. Everybody have a happy and safe Thanksgiving.